This is lesson 3-4a, inverse functions. There's going to be three main steps that we do to perform this. I called the first step 0. It's not really a big step, so I didn't feel like granting it a number 1. Use y in place of f of x, swap x and y, solve for y, and then check domain restrictions if applicable. So here we go. Find the inverse of f of x equals x squared with the domain restriction x is less than or equal to 0. Okay, the first step is to just replace f of x with y. I'll just do that as such. And then the next step is to swap x with y. So we'll get x equals y squared. And then what we want to do is solve for y. What undoes squaring? Not just square rooting, but plus or minus square rooting. So if I square root this side, I must plus or minus square root that side. So we'll end up with y equals plus or minus the square root of x. All right, normally I'd be done, but I do have a domain restriction, so I gotta check it out over in my last step. So what I like to do is make a list of the original and the inverse and just compare domains and range. So here I go. Got the original, which was y equals x squared, and the inverse, y equals plus or minus the square root of x. And I'm going to check the domain and the range of each. And I find it very helpful to have a little sketch. So y equals x squared, I'll just sketch that right here. All right, so y equals x squared. Now keep in mind, it said x was less than or equal to 0, so this part is all gone. So it's really just this part that I'm going to concern myself with. So the domain was given to me, x less than or equal to 0, and the range, that's just the vertical part of the graph, all y greater than or equal to 0. And with the function and the inverse, the domain and range are swapped. So I usually just draw arrows like this. This domain becomes that range, this range becomes that domain. So the domain of my inverse is going to be x is greater than or equal to 0, and the range of my inverse is going to be y is less than or equal to 0. I also like to sketch a quick graph of my inverse. Now the way that the function and the inverse work is they are reflected about the line y equals x. So if I were to reflect this about that line, you'd see that it was graphically like that. All right, also, my range, that matches my range, y less than or equal to 0. So if I want my range to be 0 or negative, I'm going to have this be a negative. Because this part of the graph is y equals negative the square root of x. If I had this part up here, that would correspond to y equals positive the square root of x. If I had that section over there, but I don't. So this is the sketch, and this is the answer to my problem. Not the plus or minus, but the minus. Had this domain restriction been x greater than or equal to 0, then that domain being 0 or above would have meant that this range would have been 0 and above, and that would have been a positive. So there you have it. How to find the inverse of a function.